Okay, good evening everyone, and welcome to tonight's presentation of OTF Connects, titled A Closer Look at the Listening Strand in the Core French Classroom with Mariah Mallette. Bonsoir à tous et à toutes, nous sommes heureux de vous accueillir sur OTF Connects pour la présentation de Mariah Mallette qui s'intitule « Examiner de plus près le domaine de l'écoute au cœur de la classe de français ». Nous avons un excellent groupe ce soir. Je tiens à vous remercier tous d'avoir sacrifié votre soirée en famille pour venir nous rejoindre ce soir sur OTF Connect afin de partager vos idées et votre expérience. We are certainly thrilled to have each and every one of you with us tonight. It's also our absolute pleasure to welcome Mariah Mallette. J'ai eu le plaisir de modérer la session de Mariah en juin dernier, consacrée aux technologies qu'elle utilise dans sa classe de français. Ce fut une session très captivante et très animée avec de nombreuses contributions de votre part. Mariah est une enseignante extrêmement dynamique et passionnée et cela se remarque lors de ses présentations et j'en suis certain également au sein de sa classe. Mariah enseigne le français à partir de la 5e jusqu'en 8e année pour le conseil scolaire du district de Lambton-Kent. Elle enseigne depuis 8 ans et se passionne pour intégrer les technologies dans son programme afin d'améliorer l'expérience d'apprentissage des élèves. Elle est membre actif du programme Microsoft Innovative Educator Expert et est également une éducatrice agréée du niveau 1 de Google Educator. Alors voilà, donc je voudrais maintenant passer le micro à Mariah afin qu'elle puisse partager avec vous son expérience et son enthousiasme. So Mariah, feel free to click on your talk button.
Can you hear me?
Okay, that's great. We can all hear you. That's perfect. So go ahead. I'm going to switch my microphone off and you can take over.
Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction. Actually, this year I'm in a new role for our board. I just accepted the position as a language consultant, and so that has started in September, and it's been a roller coaster up and down as I've started to learn in this new journey. But it's definitely pushed me out of my comfort zone, and I'm looking forward to seeing what else I can learn in this new job. Because the listening strand is relatively new, I often feel that it's one of the hardest ones to wrap my head around, and especially because listening is an invisible act. So you don't get to see what the student is thinking when they're listening to something, and you don't understand necessarily what it is that students are finding easy with the text and what it is that they're maybe having difficulty with, because there are so many variables that can influence what a person understands when they're listening to something. So today we're going to take a closer look at the curriculum. We're going to talk about the strategies that are identified in there. We're going to look at the listening to learn document and talk about what makes listening hard and how these things can impact our planning as teachers. And then at the end we're going to talk about, or I'm going to share some of the different activities that I've done or seen that can be used to support listening in the classroom. All right. Oh, Michelle, I don't think I have the presenter access anymore because my computer restarted on me.
Okay, no worries.
So
I can see that. Hold on a second. Where are you located? I'm trying to find you. Okay, I see you. Okay, I see you. Okay, no problem. I got you. Okay, I give you moderator's privilege. Okay, no problem.
Thanks.
No problem.
So I'll give you a couple seconds to read this quote. So this idea, the idea that listening and speaking is paramount for second language acquisition, has had one of the biggest impacts on the way that I teach and the way that I think when I'm planning for instruction in my classroom. The idea that students need to hear the language first, as it's the way that they're going to learn how to say it later on. If we think, it made me reflect on, if we're thinking about, I have a daughter right now, she just turned 1 in June, and she's getting ready to start talking, and it made me reflect on that and made me think, well, If we think about how we learn our first language, you know, you grow up and you're hearing your parents and family speaking the language around you. That's the first thing. And then one day you start to be able to say some of those words and expressions. And you're not obviously fluent in it just like that, but that language capacity grows from there. And it's not until after we've been listening and speaking for several years that we learn to read and write. This is a quote that comes from the oral proficiency. It's a guide to reflective practice, an episode guide to reflective practice, the oral proficiency document. It's a great read to support building student oral proficiency. But one thing that stood out for me when I read it was the idea that students, again, should be hearing the words and expressions before we're asking them to use them in spoken, written, or in reading. So again, it just reminds me of the way that we learn our first language, and it was the idea of ear print was something that I had never heard of before. So in thinking about the way that we learn our first language and what we just talked about there, the question becomes, what are the strategies that our students need in order to be successful at this? And how do we help our students develop these skills? So essentially, how do we plan as teachers to help our students become more proficient, obviously listening and then speaking? So there's many things that influence how we teach listening. And I want to talk about these first because it's important to understand the process in getting there before we talk about the actual tasks and activities that we do with our students and what those can look like. So first and foremost, informing the way we're teaching and what we're doing in our classrooms is obviously the curriculum. We as the teachers need to identify the listening skills that students need to develop, and we need to think about how we can provide them opportunities throughout class to practice those skills. We need to identify the purpose of our listening skills. So are they having to interact in a social situation, or are they having to understand something for a purpose in school? Obviously, some of the strategies that they're going to be using in both situations can cross over. But us as teachers need to be thinking about, well, what is it that I'm wanting them to do with this task in order to be able to help bring out those proper strategies. There needs to be a progression, so that gradual release of responsibility, anything that we're obviously expecting our students to be able to do independently, we should have modeled it for them and provide them many opportunities to practice that certain strategy or skill in context before we expect them to do it independently. The opportunities that we give them also need to be increased in complexity. So for example, at the beginning, students might be expected to understand basic, simple things such as directions or instructions or school announcements. But as they gain confidence and their competence with the listening grows, the way students demonstrate their understanding or the interactions that we're expecting them to have can grow more complex. So instead of maybe just understanding and showing, like acting out something, taking point form notes during a classroom presentation or providing a summary of an oral text that they've listened to. There needs to be, again, those daily opportunities to practice that skill. Obviously, this can look different from day to day, but how are we setting that up in our class so that they can practice these things? We also need to contextualize the listening interactions and activities for students. So for example, brainstorm what students already know about the topic, if it's something new that they're hearing, activating prior knowledge by watching videos for a first time without audio so they can maybe start to have discussions around what they see in the pictures or videos and make predictions about that. So are we encouraging our students to think about listening strategies during and after in small groups and in talking activities as well? The next thing that we need to think about, so this obviously the strategies, and it touched on them obviously in the curriculum a little bit. A lot of things are going to cross over on one another. But the Listening to Learn document here is a great read, and it's really quick. It's a really small document, and it reinforces the ideas from the curriculum that listening is the springboard for language acquisition and the most prominent ongoing source of language input for most learners. So again, because listening isn't often visible, this document tells us that we need to provide direct instruction and feedback related to whatever listening skills and strategies it is that we're expecting of our students. So we have to be thinking about, what does that direct instruction look like? How am I teaching my students these skills? And what does that look like? So in thinking about reflections, on the left-hand side, Michelle showed you the text box feature. I want you to think, what strategies do you currently work on with your students when you are asking them to, or when you're teaching listening, and how do you explicitly teach these listening skills to your students? And just, you can add ideas, add as many as you want. I've broken it down into strategies for understanding. So students, for example, could be listening to an oral text and they just have to understand what it says, versus strategies for interacting. And then we'll take about 2 or 3 minutes to do this, and then we're going to talk about them. I'm going to mute my mic in the meantime.
Pour ceux d'entre vous qui ont peut-être manqué le début de la présentation, donc vous choisissez le 4e outil sur la barre d'outils verticale, c'est la lettre A, donc la lettre A sans les lignes, et ensuite vous pouvez cliquer sur la diapo, sur l'image de Mariah, et vous pouvez écrire directement. Et pour ceux d'entre vous qui sont sur une tablette ou sur un téléphone portable, vous pouvez écrire vos suggestions ou vos réponses dans la boîte de clavardage. Merci. Lots of really great ideas and ways to teach the strategies here, and it's really great. I think sometimes as core French teachers especially, we don't always get the opportunity to pick one another's brains, because often we're the only teacher in the classroom. So being able to share in these types of ways I find really beneficial.
So some of the strategies when I was looking and planning for this and going into the curriculum a little bit deeper, some of the strategies that really stood out to me is the idea of activating prior knowledge. And obviously that can look different depending on what the listening text is or what the text is that you're going to be working with, and what grade you're doing it with. But you can have students brainstorm lists of words and expressions that they already know are related to a topic that they're going to be listening about. You have them talk about it, bring up an image and have them talk about it before. Sorry, I'm following along in the chat in the meantime too, and it's distracting me at points. Essentially, what are those words and expressions that they already know? So a lot of people have talked about identifying, listening for the familiar words and expressions, listening for cognates, identifying keywords. You could have them create word webs as a class or independently with older grades. And if there's going to be words and expressions that the students have trouble with, or you can anticipate that they're not going to know, you can provide anticipation guides, essentially as like a key to some of those words and expressions that will help improve their understanding throughout the text. Another skill for before is making predictions. I mentioned earlier, I'd never thought about this before, and I read this strategy somewhere recently, the idea of watching a video first without the audio, having the students see the images, the videos appear, and then having them make predictions based on what they see. So again, starting to activate that prior knowledge. Some of the different strategies that identifies for during the listening, using visual clues, so body language, I saw that, and gestures, reading people's facial expressions, looking at the images, using audio clues as well, such as the tone of someone's voice to recognize a question or anger or disagreement with someone else. Making predictions throughout the text. So you could pause the audio and ask them to think about what's going to happen based on what they've already heard. Have students make connections. Pausing, asking questions that relate to the text. So do you agree with that? Do you like this? Explain why. Students can record information. I know I saw this in a few different places on the table as well as in the chat. So in how they record information can be different depending, I guess, on your students as well. So having them visualize it, having them draw or sketch out what they've heard or understood, having them take notes, and again, with varying degrees depending on how difficult the text is or what grade you're doing with. They could listen and just have to record, take notes of the familiar words and expressions that they've heard, or listen for cognates. Maybe they have to listen the second time and record new words or expressions that they've never heard before. We can ask questions to clarify their understanding. They can ask to repeat the audio, so if they didn't understand something, so that they can listen back to it again, if it's an oral or a recording that they're listening to. And then contextual clues throughout as well. So inferring meaning of a word based on what was talked about before it or after it. So if we know it's a word that they're not going to understand, we can pause, we can rewind a little bit, play it again, ask them to think about what they think that word means and really challenge their thinking in those ways. And then after, having students reflect on what they heard, re-listen to it if they need to, making connections again to the text in a variety of different ways, whether it be expressing opinions or comparing and contrasting to something within their own lives. With regards to that, and obviously the difference that can be seen when listening to interact, obviously, when we're going through and we're planning and we're thinking about the interaction piece, we're obviously looking to the curriculum expectations. But for me, I had never sat down and actually looked at what the difference was with specific expectations from grade 4 through 8 when it came specifically to the interacting piece. And it was really interesting to me that when you look closely to grade 4 and 5, so this is core French, obviously, it talks about the interactions being brief and structured about themselves and their families and their immediate environment. When you look at the grade 6, It talks about it more being in guided interactions, and it's not until 7 and 8 that it doesn't address having them being structured or guided, that it looks like it would be more independent at that point. And so we talked about that guided or the gradual release of responsibility. So I just found it really interesting that when it comes to interacting, that gradual release of responsibility was over the course of years and grades, and not just necessarily 1 year. And that it's okay if our students' interactions in grade 4 and 5 are a little bit more structured. It's about trying to get them to that more spontaneous piece by the end of grade 8. So I'm looking back to then strategies that relate specifically to interactions. A lot of the same ones are going to apply, obviously. So activating prior knowledge. But when it comes to during, we need to be talking about what it looks like to take turns when speaking. So when is it your turn to listen? When is it your turn to speak? How do you know? And how do you have that conversation without interrupting someone? Teaching, looking at the speaker, using body language to be to understand the person and to be able to be understood. So I'm nodding that I agree with what that person said. Responding to questions using familiar words and phrases. Asking questions, especially if they don't understand in an interaction, and what kind of words and expressions and questions do they need to know how to say in order to ask for that clarification or for repetition. With regards to making connections, what are those natural conversation phrases? So for example, if you're having a conversation with someone, you're like, oh, me too, or that's really interesting, or you're agreeing or disagreeing with someone. So what are those words and expressions that they need that relate specifically to having a conversation with someone that keeps that conversation going? So next, with thinking about planning, we need to think about how we can include opportunities for students to self-reflect on those strategies and how they use them. So again, because the listening is an invisible act, this is a really important piece. It helps students identify what their strengths are and where their needs of improvement are, and it helps them set goals. And again, just like with everything else, we need to provide them the opportunities to practice this if we're going to expect them to be able to be successful at it. When we look at the grade 4 and 5 expectations when it comes to metacognition, it talks about them identifying a few strategies, and it's in 6, 7, and 8. They're identifying the factors that prevent them from listening effectively. So essentially, what makes listening hard for them, and then what are some strategies that they found helpful with dealing with that, or to improve that listening opportunity. Gradual release of responsibility is really important in planning as well for the listening. Often I find when I was planning for my writing, the gradual release of responsibility was always there, but it wasn't until recently that it really started to change everything that I did in my classroom, and everything that I taught, I would make sure that was modeled first, and then I would make sure that we had opportunities for shared and guided, and then eventually independent. And that if I didn't give them that full range and release of that responsibility, then the success that they were having at the end wasn't always what I wanted it to be. And when reflecting on that, it was because I hadn't provided enough of those opportunities for them to practice. I think this is really important because if we reflect on anything that we're learning, we start to realize that, we need someone to show us how to do it first. And then from there, we benefit from being able to watch that person maybe do it, and maybe them letting us help out for a little bit. And then eventually we start to gain a better understanding of that skill, and we start to try it with that expert nearby to help us and give us feedback on what it is that we're doing and how we can improve. And it's without those practice opportunities, you know, we can't gain that independence. And that feedback and all of those things along the way are what allow for us to improve our confidence with the skill and to gain that independence as we go. And I think it's important to remember that's exactly how, you know, everybody learns and our students are going to learn as well. So when we are planning for listening, we need to be reflecting on this. How am I providing these opportunities for my students, and what does that look like for me? The dials of difficulty are from the Listening to Learn document. Again, it's just a really quick read. It talks about, it's a differentiated approach to teaching listening in FSL, and I think it's a really great thing to reflect on when teaching and planning listening activities for our students and the audio text that we decide to use with them. So it identifies 6 key factors that can influence the difficulty with which of the oral text that I guess we use with our students. So, and the idea is that we can adjust these dials when we're choosing an oral text to better meet the needs of our students. So you'll see there's topic, purpose, complexity, accent and register, pace, and support. So for example, if the pace of the text is very fast, makes it harder for the students. Maybe the topic is in the middle. It's something that they've got some familiarity with, but there are maybe some challenging words and expressions. But maybe there are multiple supports. So there's lots of pictures and other things that are going to help them with being able to understand some of the ideas at least. Students with Realize then might still be able to understand. They'll just have to work on a strategy that helps them adjust that pace if it is really fast. We wouldn't want to introduce an oral text for students where all of the dials are turned up to very hard, as likely the students would have difficulty understanding what exactly is going on in the text. So that helps us again, to better select oral texts to use with our students, and we can, we also need to be mindful of the difficulty of the activity that we're asking our students to do related to the text. I also like these because I think it really lends itself nicely to that metacognition piece, expectation 2.3, especially when with those intermediate students when they need to describe the factors that prevent them from listening effectively and determine some strategies that they found helpful. So something like this, they could identify, you know, oh, that topic was, you know, pretty easy, but it was the speed of the oral text that made it hard for me to understand. And if it is the speed, what is it exactly that I can do to help understand better the next time? So again, thinking about planning, what's the purpose of our listening activity? So this is the purposes that are identified, or some of the purposes that are identified in the curriculum. Why are we having our students do this, and what is it that I want my students to work on or get out of the listening that we're doing? So are they learning vocabulary? Are they making meaning of the text? Are they learning social aspects from different cultures? Are they learning about the sociolinguistic conventions? Are they working on metacognitive strategy? I found this really challenged me to think about listening in a different way, because I found I always got into a rut where I would give my students an oral text to listen to, and then they would answer questions about it, and they were just showing me their understanding. So this provided a different context with which to think about listening and what those activities could look like in my classroom. And this is from the Listening to Learn document again. It just puts a different spin on the purpose by identifying the role of the listener. So depending on what it is we want our students to do with the listening task, it again helps me differentiate the types of activities that I'm going to do with them, as well as the types of audio clips that I would use. So for example, if I chose that I wanted my students to be the addressee, that, for example, my class could be if we're working on restaurants. So we often do an old restaurant theme where they're working on being able to order food in a restaurant, take orders. But if I want them to be the addressee, I might have them just listen to a person's food order. So it's one person talking, and the other person is just listening, and they have to be able to identify what it is the person wanted. So there's no interaction, just listening and understanding. So, or I think of my grade 8s, and I have them talk about movies and being able to give their opinions about movies and which one they would want to see and what they like about them and whatnot. And so if I wanted my grade 8s to be an addressee when listening, I would have them just listen to someone giving their opinion and have them tell me about it. If it was participant, then obviously that interaction piece becomes more apparent. So for this particular example, I might have my students for the restaurant, one becomes the customer, one maybe becomes the server, and they participate in a spontaneous role play. So they have to listen and understand in order to be able to interact with one another or participate in that discussion. And over here, with, again, the restaurant theme, I might create a listening text, an oral text, that I would give them that's a conversation between a customer and a server, and they have to determine what the person ordered based on the conversation. And the conversation can be more simple at the beginning, where it's very, what would you like to eat? I would like this. And then, or it could be more complex, where maybe their server asks what they would like to eat, but then the customer says, oh, I'd like this, but the server starts asking other questions to pull out more details, and the customer is telling them no once in a while. So they're hearing a lot of different words and expressions in the text, but they're having to really identify what it is that the person said they wanted and said that they didn't want. When it comes to judge, I think to my grade 8s, so they could be listening to two people debate about whether or not a movie was any good, and then they have to make a decision themselves as to whether or not they would want to go see it after hearing that conversation. And consumer, again, in the restaurant, listening to the server talk about the daily specials and making a decision, or watching a commercial for a toy and deciding whether or not they want to buy it. So this, again, forced me to change the way that I frame tasks around listening with my students, because it made me start to reflect on what those types of roles could look like in my classroom with the different contexts that I was teaching my students. And finally, when it comes to planning, we're obviously always thinking about how we can assess and evaluate this process. And I think we need to remember that there's always the triangulation of data. We need to be including observation, conversations, and products in the end, and that we need to be using our professional judgment. So how do we do this for understanding, how do we make those observations, and how do we have those conversations with the kids when listening is something that is very internal? So we can track while students work with partners or in small groups. We can use oral tests to check in to inform our teaching forward. We can see where most kids are, if they understand a certain concept or strategy, and if we need to revisit it as the whole class. We can take anecdotal notes. We can have students do self-reflections often in order to give us a little insight into what it is that they're thinking. Conferencing with students, asking them to explain their thinking, asking them to share what strategies they've used, and giving them feedback along the way. And for the product, it's oral tests, quote unquote, so to see where they're at, reflection cards for students to fill out, again, self-reflection forms. Perfect. So, in moving into the activities or the types of what this could look like, I'm just going to share kind of what it would look like for me and how I go through the gradual release of responsibility. And then I'm going to share some activities or strategies that I've used with my students along the way to gather evidence. Oops, I'm going to ask, do you do all of the metacognition discussions in French? I hadn't in the past, and I struggle with that. I know that there are some people that are going to be like, oh, that has to be in French too. I felt like for the learning to be truly deep and for my kids to truly understand, they needed to be able to express their ideas fully when it came to that. And I feel like having them do that in French, they'd be very limited with what they could explain to me. So all the activities and tasks would be in French, but when we talked about the strategies, it would be in English. But in thinking and moving forward, I think if I was more explicit with the strategies, so if I was focusing on a different strategy all the time, I would try to, and explicitly teaching them in the way that I now picture doing that, I would be having those conversations with them in French, so maybe would expect a little bit more from them in French than I had previously. So for me in my classroom, it looked like I found it really hard to find good recordings or oral texts that I could use with my students that were authentic and at a level that my kids could understand. So I always found I was creating a lot of them. I was enlisting the help of a lot of my teacher friends to help make recordings as well that I could use with the students in order to be able to provide them enough practice around these things. Having said that, now having looked at the Listening to Learn document and seeing those dials, I think there are some texts that I probably could introduce now to my students, but I would change because I'd be changing the activity that I expect them to do with it. It would change my viewpoint on whether or not I could use it with my students. So those dials have really altered my thinking. So I would select one of the recordings, and I'd obviously use it as a model in the class, and I'd show them what I would do with it. So for example, if I was doing a Je me présente and I had a recording with someone just talking about themselves, I would play that example for them, and then if the task that I wanted them to do was to just take notes as to what were the main points that they understood from the text, I would show them how that I would do that, and I would talk through my thinking as well. When it came to the shared, I'd come up with a different oral recording that supported the same or presented the same types of information, and I'd have them work with a partner or in a small group to do a similar activity. So now they might listen, I'd pause it, and then I would ask them what did they hear in that section, and then we'd take it up right away on the board together, and then we'd go through another section. So they'd have the opportunity to work and discuss through in a small group, but we'd also be taking it up right away. For the guided piece, I would be giving them a new oral recording. I would have them work in groups of 2 to 3 students with the chart paper maybe at their group. They would listen to the text and go through that themselves, taking the notes themselves. And as they're doing that, I can circulate and help and ask them about their thinking as they're going through it. And I give them feedback on whatever it is that they're working towards, and if they were struggling with something, and ask them what strategies they could use to help better understand if they were struggling with something. And then finally, after a few different opportunities for them to practice in those types of situations, we would move to a more independent piece where I would then be evaluating what it was that they understood. But it would be the same task. They would be jotting down the main notes and sharing that, and then I would ask them to reflect as well on their thinking through that. Anything that I was expecting them to do independently, I was always making sure I went through that whole process before I would expect them to do it by themselves. So, some activities that I've done or that relate to the different listening activities or, I guess, purposes and changes around listening. So, for example, the restaurant thing, instead of just here's someone talking about what they ordered, there's lots of different ways that can look. So if I wanted them, I could have them working in partners. I would give them a menu and an envelope with pictures of the different food, the breakfast foods in this case, in it. Student A would be the customer. Student B would be the server. They would have the opportunity to practice a role play interacting and ordering food. So partner A would ask for an order, partner B would listen. They could ask further details if they needed to. And as partner B, the person who's acting as the server is listening, they're going to pull the images from the envelope or find the images that support what it is that their partner ordered and they can compare whether or not it was that was what the message was that the person was getting across. Anchor charts would be accessible around the room along with obviously the success criteria. We work on the server being able to draw out extra information. So for example, if they said, I'd like a number 3, please, if they said they need a number 3, please, the server would then ask, oh, would you like cheddar or Swiss or yellow cheese with that? And they're trying to extend that to make it as natural as possible. Then I would have them switch roles, and they could do that in a few different situations, and I would probably say 7 to 10 minutes in class, and then we move on to other activities. But again, just a safe way for them to practice that listening in a variety of different situations. I could give them a variety of different menus. I set up as centers. As the kids are working through these types of activities, it gives me the opportunity to circulate around, observe, take notes if I need to, have discussions in small groups, or if I need to pull students to work with them, I can have those conversations and be a participant to see what it looks like for those individual kids. Another way that it would be neat is using Explain Everything if you have access to the technology, and having one student asking for an order, and then on the screen at the same time is an image with all the different breakfast foods, and the person who's the server is circling the order as the person talks about it. And as they ask questions back and gain more information, you're able to hear that interaction piece and also see the screen on the screen what objects they've circled while going through that process as well. I really like physical response types of activities. They're activities where kids are moving. I think of the directions, and when I'm asking my students to learn the commands or where something's located, a quick activity that we might do is I might say, oh, everybody stand up. We'd already been practicing it. I'd be like, you're to the right of the chair, you're to the left of the chair, you're on your chair, you're under your chair, you're in front of your chair, you're behind your chair. We might start slower, but it's great because the whole class is doing it. Everybody's listening at the same time. If they don't know it right away, they do have the supports of looking around the classroom to see what other people are doing. And after doing it several times, they get to identify things really quickly. And for me, that quick piece, and that is what leads to that spontaneity eventually. And the kids love being up and moving, and it's fun being able to watch them. And while they're doing that, I can then, again, take observations as to who's really got it, or if there's anyone that's really struggling. Eventually, too, we can move to more of a partner interaction or a small group where they are taking turns giving, so same activity, but they might work in just a partner with a small group of 2 to 3. And then that allows me to go around and circulate and observe and take notes while they're practicing those same ideas. You could do it with commands as well, so telling them to move forward, move backward, turn to the left, turn to the right, having them move around the room. You could have them draw out the route on a map as you give directions, so everybody's got the same map, and you give the directions and you identify where the starting point is. You tell them the directions and they're drawing it out, and then that piece of paper they hand in and you're able to see what that looks like and how much they understood based on that text that everybody was listening to at the same time. They could also do that similarly with a partner like Battleship. They could do it on laminated file folders where person A draws the route on the map and they have to give the directions to person B who's listening and then drawing the route as they listen and following along, and then they can compare each other's routes and erase them and do it again. For me, it's always trying to get them to practice those same strategies or skills in as many different situations as possible to help reinforce the language. There's a clip that we'll put in the box for this one. So having students identify their understanding by using pictures. So for this particular task, this is just one section. I had 4 sections that looked similar to this, where they were 2 different pictures, and the 2 different pictures were very, well, sometimes were very close and sometimes were very different, depending on what I wanted and how easy I wanted to make the task. The students would listen to an interaction or conversation between a customer and a waiter, and based on the conversation they need to determine which was the meal that was ordered. I would progress the difficulty in this activity by including 2 images that were very similar. So for example, a breakfast sandwich in both pictures, but maybe one had ham on it and one had bacon. And I could also progress the difficulty by increasing the complexity of the interaction. So the waiter could ask for more details about the order, and maybe the customer responds that they don't want that, but instead want something else. And the students have to still be able to, they have to listen and acknowledge that the person didn't want that. They can't just listen for the keywords and assume that that was what the person ordered. So if you click on that link, oh, it's not the Google Form one. Here, I'll grab this link. Should be this link here. There we go. This would be the listening piece that would go with the picture on the screen. So I'll give everybody a minute and a half to listen to that. Did someone have a question? Oh, of course. Sorry, I just realized I think that one's a video, and that's why, so it's going to prompt you to download, but you can look at it after. It would just someone just asked, are there certain topics that students gravitate to more than other students? I find it's always really hard because every student is going to want something different. I try to think about what is the purpose of what it is that I'm teaching them. In what situations in my student's life will they potentially encounter French, and why will they need it? So for me, most of my students, the times that they're going to see French are when they're traveling. And so from there, we talk a lot about directions. We talk a lot about ordering food in a restaurant. We talk a lot about themselves and the things that relate to them. Students, for me, would be listening to these conversations on iPads. I was fortunate that I had 12 iPads just for my classroom or for my program. I would, depending on how many you have and what it looks like, if I had 5, I would run it as a center, perhaps, and so I would have other speaking activities related to the same learning context going on while 5 students were working on it. With 12, I would have 12 students work on it, and while those 12 were working on it, I'd work with the other half of the class doing, again, usually spoken activities that support those same language structures and concepts. For this particular example, we were working towards being able to order food in a restaurant. So everything in class was a progression up to that point. So we would be doing spoken activities in class while other people were working on the listening. The other question, some other ways to get computers in your room, could have them listening to it that way. An echo pen, I would create the text on that and again have them listening to it through that. Or we also have a BYOD board, so I would put it into some sort of file that all of my kids could access from their own devices. To create that one, oh gosh, I'm just trying to think. Most of my oral recordings are created on my iPad, so it's usually just like a Quick Voice or Voice Recorder Pro. Anything that just records audio. If I'm doing a video, sometimes I'll do them and explain everything. Sometimes I'll do them in iMovie, depending on what it is that I want in that video. There was a comment about, sorry, I'm just trying to follow along here in the chat box. The person playing the server not really being authentic for them. I'm not trying to make it authentic for that person. I'm trying to create a situation for the students to practice those same language structures. They're never going to get to the point where they can do it independently and actually authentically if they don't have the chance to communicate during class. And it's a means to an end, and so they're practicing. I'm not assessing their ability to be the server. I'm looking at them being able to order food and express their ideas around what they want from a menu. Perfect. Okay. Another type of activity is using Google Forms with videos embedded into it. So the videos that can be embedded into it are off of YouTube. I haven't found other links that I can use that embed properly, but usually, again, because I'm making most of my own recordings or I'm finding something on YouTube, if it's something that I made, I will upload it to my private YouTube channel so that I can use it with my students in class. So I would upload it and embed it in the top of the Google form. And then I would create questions based on the text that show me their understanding. And again, depending on what it was that you were looking for your students to be able to do, the questions can be changed. So this example I just include so you can kind of see some of the options. You can have short answer. You can have a drop-down menu where they choose the proper answer, so like kind of like a multiple choice there. Or you can have them be able to select, you know, several different answers from check boxes. They click submit. What I like about it is that it gathers the responses for you really quickly, and on the next slide I'll show you what some of those responses can look like. You can have it collect the email addresses. So if you're a Google Apps for Education board, you can, like for me, I would select this box here. So then that way when they submit their responses, they have to be logged in and it automatically collects their email addresses for me. If you're not a Google Apps for Education board, you could still create these types of forms. They would just be open, and I would create a question then, and it would be their name, and they would have to fill in their name so that I knew exactly whose responses were what. You can make it a quiz now in Google Forms, which is also really nice. You can select them to whether or not you want them to get their grade or not. If you select immediately, the link will show up that says like see, I can't remember what it said exactly, see or access your responses. If you have it later, then you can have it emailed to them. So if you click on, there's a to Google Classroom. What type of, someone asked, can you upload a clip to Google Classroom? What kind of clip? Or like an audio clip? The link that Michelle just included should bring you to this Google form, and you can actually go through the process and submit it and see what it looks like for the student's view. Yes, you can include clips into Google Classroom. So I always had my students actually, I sent them the links or I sent them the clips right in Google Classroom, so the stream, or you can embed it right in the assignment. And I also had students submit oral recordings to me all the time on Google Classroom. Can you create a Google form like yours in Google Classroom as an assignment? Yes, so you would go in Google Drive and you create the Google form, create this type of task, and then when you go to create your assignment, there's a spot where you can select from Google Drive, and you would find the activity that you just created and attach it to the assignment. Yep. So I'll give everybody a few minutes to click on that link, and then so you have a kind of go through the process and see what it looked like for your students before I show you what the results look like for the teacher's view. Here's the link again for those that missed it. Okay, so you'll see if you went through that, when you click submit at the bottom, you get the two options, view your accuracy and see previous responses. So if you click on view your accuracy, it will tell you how you did, if that was chosen as an option when you, as the teacher, set up those, set up that setting. If you click on see previous responses, then it will bring you into this view here, and I will bring it up on Blackboard. What I like about it is this particular view, the summary view, you see the overall of how your students did. So up here you see the short answer, so it lists the short answer. If they were a paragraph type of answer, they would also be listed like this. Here, if as a multiple choice, it tells you what percentage selected which particular answer. So you can see that here they selected, most people selected 1, which was the correct answer. and then one person, again, I had taken this screenshot previously to everybody answering it, but that one person had gotten selected owns as the answer. When it comes to selecting multiple boxes from a checklist, it shows you how many people chose which responses, and then tells you the daily number of responses, which I've never really used. So that's the summary view from Google Forms. When you look at the views of responses in Google Sheets, you get the nice picture as to each student's responses. So I'm going to see if I can find, there's a link so that you can see everybody's response to actually the quiz, or just going through the process right there, so you can kind of explore what that looks like. Again, it's nice because it gives you, thank you. I'll let everybody have a look and then I'll explain the details of it, just so that we're not flipping between screens. So when you have had a look and you come back, just put your hand up from the, oh, there we go, from the box, so I know that you're ready to move on. Okay, so in looking at that, you see that it collects the timestamp for you. Again, if I was doing this with my students, I'd select it where they have to be logged in. So one of the columns here would be their email address. If I was in a Google Apps for Education school board, then I would include a question called, what is your name? And then it would also show up as a column in here. So anything, any questions you create, it will create a new column for, and then the answers will be collected there. Again, you can then see each individual response, and it just, for me, was a really clean and easy way to collect all of that evidence. And I could use this depending on what I'm doing in my class. If I used it near the beginning, I could then see, oh, you know, we need to focus on this, and what strategy can we use to help support that? Or I could use it at the end to assess what they've understood from a new oral text. Someone asked me what program I used to make this video. In this particular video, I used, oh my goodness, what did I use? There's lots of them that do, like Chatter Pix, I think, does something similarly. This was FaceTalk, actually. It's a free app for the iPad. I'm sure there's an app for every device that would do something similarly. It was just a different way for me to show a video to my students. Edpuzzle is similar to Google Forms, but it allows you to embed questions right within the video. So the video would stop wherever it is you want it to, and a question would pop up for the students. It gathers the information, again, for you if you've registered as a teacher. If you're Google Apps for Education board, you can link it with your Google account, so you don't have to create a separate username or anything. Your students can join, and I believe that it would work nicely as well with Google Classroom, because you could just send the link it is that you want your students to complete. So in the chat box, you've got the example here. Again, I use the same movie just to be able to show you with a quick clip what it could look like. And then there are tutorials as to how to use Edpuzzle or how to create an Edpuzzle for those that are interested. So I'll give everybody a couple minutes to look at that, and when you're back, just raise your hand so we know we can move on.
Yeah, I think it's about time, I think, to Aoki. You're still answering some of the questions. And I just wanted to make sure that you remember to click on your talk button when you want to resume.
Yep, thanks. I was just answering some questions in the chat as we were waiting. So yeah, face Soccer is really simple. You just you can insert a picture and then you draw a line across where you want the mouse to move, and then you record your voice on top. It allows you to save it to camera roll. When it comes to putting it on YouTube, if it's something that I just want for my students that I don't want like worldwide, there's a setting. I can't think of it off the top of my head right now. There's public, which means anyone could search for it and find it. There's one where essentially anyone with the link can see it. That's the one that I usually select. So then that way when I embed it, my students can view it. They're not generally sharing a link with anyone. Not that I really care if anyone else sees it, but I just would prefer if, I don't know, they're not searching, or it is not easily searched for if it doesn't need to be, but it doesn't really matter. Just wanted really quick if there was any questions. My computer catches up. Yeah, Telegami and sock puppets are also really easy ones too that are definitely neat ones. Telegami can be saved to your camera roll, but I think then again would have to be put, anything that can be saved on your camera roll can then be put on, uploaded to YouTube, and then embedded. So makes it pretty easy for making really quick clips to use to kids. And to share with other teachers, especially if they've been put on YouTube, because why reinvent the wheel, everybody all at the same time. So in trying to think about listening tasks that are accessible by our students, and trying to make them authentic, here's a video. The link will, perfect, thank you. The McDonald's advertisement link is there. McDonald's has a French YouTube channel, so the commercials that they release in English, they release in French too, and I think a lot of companies in Canada do, so it's being resourceful and finding those ones that suit and support the things that we're doing in our classroom. And so for this particular video, I would show it to my students first without the sound. I'd have them talk about what they see, make predictions, and then we would watch it with the audio. While they're listening, students could take notes. They could identify and listen for words they already know, words that sound familiar. I'd have them try to determine the meaning of specific words within the oral text to see if they can use different strategies to figure them out. I'd ask them how they determined what those words mean. And then I would have them express their opinion as to whether or not it would be good to eat. This could also be integrated nicely with writing. There's McDonald's.fr, their France website has, you can order online now, so I would probably try to adapt that website somehow or take screenshots of it to use with my students to actually have them order from their website, quote unquote, because obviously we don't want to put real orders through. But if you want to take just a quick minute to watch that video and see how quick and easy it is. It's just about 15 seconds, I believe. And when you're back, just put your hand up for us really quickly. So I like that because it had a lot of prompts, like visual prompts, and it was quick and to the point, and I feel like something that my students would be able to understand, even though the speed with which they speak is generally pretty quick. I think that something like this would also lend itself nicely with Christmas coming up and all the advertisements like for toys and different electronics and things like that, that get the kids talking around those types of things and making connections and expressing their opinions around. So finding those authentic resources to use. And again, using those dials of difficulty to try and select ones that maybe will be easily or more easily accessible by our students in Core French. The YouTube setting that we were talking about earlier, there's public. So if someone types in, it'll pop up in the search. Unlisted, which means people only with the link will view it, and then there's private, so only you have access to it logged in. Yes, the link to the commercial was coming right here, again, for those for later. But they'll also be in the links document, I believe, that will be sent out tomorrow. Okay. This particular activity is, again, a different way to get kids to show their understanding of an oral text, having them make connections to it as well. You could have them show their understanding by using pictures or using text, depending on what it is, again, and the level that you want them to do with it and the level of your students. The link that is going to be posted is from Audiolingua. I like this because you can actually search by language and by CFR level for different texts, and there's a variety of different ones. They're native speakers from all over, and they're generally pretty quick and easy to understand. So this particular one is a young boy presenting himself, and I just did the example here with how it would relate to me. So I would ask them to identify things that related to the particular person when they presented, how it relates to me, if it's different, and then the things that we shared in common. So I will give everybody a couple minutes to listen to that audio text, and when you're back, you can raise your hand for me so I know that we're ready to move forward. The other thing I really like about them doing a Venn diagram as opposed to necessarily answering questions for them to show their understanding is that it's more open-ended. So even if they understood, you know, just balance and faire de l'escalade, you know, they could, it doesn't have to be in a complete sentence. They can, you know, show as little detail or as much detail as they can. So it really meets them all at their individual needs. This here, I think, really supports, again, the metacognition piece. So again, this is from the Listening to Learn document. And I think if you use it with your students to get them reflecting on what makes listening hard, and then in the box to the right, students would identify a strategy that helps them or could help them with this. It really, again, highlights them thinking about what it is that's making listening hard for them and what it is they can try to do to help improve that. And then I think, too, it identifies for us as teachers what it is that, you know, that those students are struggling with. Some of the ideas, if the subject was hard, we can have students activate prior knowledge, we can activate the prior knowledge. We can give students an activation guide that gives them some of the words or vocabulary in advance. We could look up or find some related words or expressions to the subject to help them with that understanding in advance. If it's the complexity that's difficult, students could be encouraged to stop the recording while listening to it in order to reflect on small chunks of it along the way. If it's the purpose that is difficult, we can, and the task is too precise, again, breaking it down in steps, listening for the first time for familiar words and expressions or cognates, and maybe the next time they listen to it and they listen for unfamiliar words, maybe the next time they pick that one unfamiliar word and they try to make meaning based on the context. Maybe we encourage them to use visual clues to help them make predictions about what something means. If it's the accent or register, again, re-listening to the text or chunking it up. And if there's a few supports for them to be able to understand, really encouraging listening for those familiar words and expressions. So helping the students think about what it is that's hard for them, and then how can they address that, and what can we do to help them with that. So there are just some different activities that could be used to assess and evaluate students' listening. Again, they'll be used at those types of activities. They would use at a variety of different points throughout a learning context, not necessarily just at the end. So my question is, again, how else can we assess and evaluate student listening? And I think it's really great if people can share their ideas. So if you can grab the text box option on the left-hand side, again, it's that A, and share what it is, something maybe you've done in your class that supports, or how you assess and evaluate understanding, or the metacognition, intercultural understanding or interaction, just to, again, pick each other's brains while we have everybody here. So we'll take about 2 to 3 minutes for that, and then we will almost be done. I just want to share some links at the end of different listening resources. So when you're done, again, adding an idea, just put your hand up so that we can move forward. Awesome, lots of great ideas. So some other notes that I had taken, again, right from the curriculum, just drawing images, selecting images from a group, or circling images, acting out an interpretation, using words, pictures, or actions to identify main ideas or details, filling out a checklist in order to select key points from a text. So instead of them having to write it out, they can select from a list, answering questions, adding notes in a graphic organizer, identifying key vocab or concepts, and then comparing, so making those connections and comparing themselves to a recording, or giving an opinion based on something, or expressing their ideas related to it. Just the last slide before we leave is some links with different authentic oral texts that can be used to support your classroom. I believe these will also be sent out tomorrow with the list, and they're put in there as well. Just some that I found some useful links to, and that I hope people will be able to find something to use in their classrooms for. So with that said, I just want to thank everybody for spending your evening with us. I really appreciate it. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me on Twitter, or you can email me through my website. Sorry, my computer is loading about 100 links right now. Oops. But yeah, so thanks so much, and hopefully you found something that you can use for your classroom.
Ok, merci beaucoup Mariah. Je te remercie d'avoir consacré ta soirée pour partager tes idées et ton expérience avec nous. Comme la fois passée, on t'a perdu en début de présentation, mais tu nous as fait un peu peur, mais tu as gardé ton calme et malgré tout, tu es revenu assez rapidement. Donc, heureusement que tu maîtrises bien les aspects technologiques de Blackboard. Et j'ai aussi remarqué que certains d'entre vous ont perdu leur connexion durant la présentation ou avaient des difficultés pour jouer et pour entendre l'équipe. Malheureusement, l'Internet reste un environnement assez instable, mais nous allons vous envoyer tous les liens et l'enregistrement de la présentation de Mariah demain par email. En tout cas, malgré les petits problèmes techniques, nous avons tous beaucoup apprécié ta présentation, toujours très dynamique et pleine de suggestions intéressantes. Je sais que c'est pas facile de parler dans le vide sans vraiment avoir de feedback et sans voir à qui on parle. C'est très différent de se retrouver face à une classe, mais enfin, tu t'en sors quand même très bien. Je tiens également à remercier tous les participants et participantes. Je suis toujours incroyablement surpris de voir à quel point vous êtes tous et toutes dévoués. Et donc, un grand merci à tous pour votre participation. Nous avons un certain nombre d'informations que nous aimerions partager avec vous avant de terminer cette session. Tout d'abord, je vais poster les liens qui vont vous permettre d'accéder aux ressources en ligne. Donc, notre calendrier, les séminaires précédents ainsi que le séminaire de Mariah. Et tout ça, évidemment, vous sera envoyé également par courriel demain. Je voudrais vous faire part d'un certain nombre de sessions particulièrement intéressantes dans les prochains jours. Le 16 novembre, nous avons une session qui s'intitule Documenting Learning with Technology in the Kindergarten Classroom avec Lee Castle, une session qui, je pense, vous intéressera tous. Le 24 novembre, nous avons une session tout à fait exceptionnelle et très différente de ce que nous présentons habituellement. Et cette session s'intitule I Don't Want to Go Back, Helping Students Explore the Limits of Armed Conflict through a Case Study on Child Soldiers with Andrea MacArthur of the Canadian Red Cross. Comme c'est une session spéciale et inédite, nous avons pour le moment finalement assez peu de participants. Nous devons avoir un minimum de 30 participants pour obtenir le financement de cette session. Alors, si vous êtes intéressé ou si vous connaissez certains de vos collègues qui seraient potentiellement intéressés, veuillez les inviter et vous inscrire. Ça nous ferait très plaisir de pouvoir maintenir cette session. Il nous manque encore une dizaine de participants. Alors, si vous êtes libre ce soir-là, donc le 24 novembre, ça nous ferait plaisir d'avoir votre participation. Alors, merci d'avance. Et le 29 novembre, nous avons une nouvelle session bilingue pour tous nos collègues francophiles et ça s'intitule Connecting and Communicating, Video Chatting in the Common European Framework of Reference Level 2 Classroom with Brianna Robertson and Tammy Wilson. And it's quite a mouthful, mais c'est une session donc qui sera encore une fois bilingue. Donc, je vous encourage à y participer. Je voudrais aussi vous informer d'une offre présentée par la FEO et le ministère de l'Éducation. Si vous êtes enseignant qualifié et avez complété un cours de qualification additionnelle, soit en mathématiques, en technologie ou en maternelle, vous pouvez obtenir une subvention de $450 et je vais mettre le lien pour avoir accès à cette page. Donc. Quoi d'autre? Oui, comme d'habitude, nous tenons également à vous présenter l'opportunité de nous faire part de votre feedback sur la séance de ce soir et de remplir un court questionnaire en ligne. Ce sondage ne prend que quelques minutes. Si vous pouviez le faire juste après la session, ce serait grandement apprécié. Vous serez redirigé automatiquement vers la page d'enquête lorsque vous quittez Blackboard. So, just to make it very clear, to all, once you actually quit the Blackboard application, you will be automatically redirected to our survey page. And please take a few minutes to complete that survey. It's extremely important for TF and allows us to obtain funding for future sessions. Et je vais également poster ce lien dans la boîte de clavardage, mais ne vous inquiétez pas, quand vous quittez Blackboard, vous allez en fait être redirigé vers cette page. Et de plus, la FEO voudrait vous offrir un petit bonus comme signe de reconnaissance pour votre participation. Une fois que vous avez rempli le questionnaire, vous serez redirigé vers une autre page où vous pourrez entrer votre nom et vous recevrez ensuite un certificat de participation que vous pourrez ajouter à votre curriculum d'apprentissage professionnel. Et ce certificat de participation n'est disponible que dans les 48 heures suivant cette session. Donc si vous avez la possibilité de faire ça demain ou après-demain, ce serait très bien. Et bien sûr, si vous ne disposez pas du temps de faire ça ce soir, ne vous inquiétez pas, nous vous enverrons demain une copie de la présentation de Mariah et ainsi que les liens pour accéder à tous ces documents. Deux dernières choses, je voudrais également vous informer de la conférence organisée par la FEO les 25 et 26 novembre à l'hôtel Crown Plaza Airport à Etobicoke. Le sujet de cette conférence présentée par Jane Rooney et James Cunningham est l'alphabétisation financière et je vais également mettre un lien dans la boîte de clavardage pour accéder à cette publicité, à cette page. Et voilà, donc finalement nous vous encourageons à suivre la FEO soit sur Twitter, Facebook ou sur YouTube ou bien évidemment sur notre site internet. Je peux maintenant conclure cette session et terminer son enregistrement. Vous êtes bien entendu libre de rester en ligne si vous souhaitez poser des questions supplémentaires à Mariah une fois l'enregistrement terminé. Sans quoi je vous souhaite encore une fois à tous et à toutes une très bonne fin de soirée. For those of you who may have additional questions, please feel free to stay online. Otherwise, I would like to thank you all once again for your participation and wish you a very good night. Merci encore Mariah et merci à toutes et à tous. Nous espérons vous revoir sur OTF Connect très prochainement. Merci.